Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third of our six-part series in partnership with the Mid-Southwest Economic Engine, Carbon Fit and Innovate UK. This webinar will be emailed out to everybody today after the session, along with any follow-up materials. And the webinar should take in around 45 minutes as we don't want to take up everybody's lunch. So we will get started. So today, we will be covering the third topic in the series, setting net zero goals and targets, and this will be delivered by Carbon Fit's Head of Partnerships and Business Development, Ben Craig. Carbon Fit is a team of chartered engineers with over 20 years' experience. They developed the Carbon Fit platform to address client issues and help simplify carbon reporting. And by integrating this technology with the team's expertise, they provide businesses with the support and guidance required to manage and effectively reduce their carbon emissions. Whether you're just beginning your net zero journey and need a carbon reduction plan, or you're looking to accelerate your journey to net zero through solutions such as supply chain analysis or green energy procurement, Carbon Fit will be able to find the right solution for your business. These webinars are part of the Net Zero programme, a partnership between the Armagh, Banbridge and Craigavon Council, Mid-Ulster and Fermanagh and Omagh Council, alongside delivery partner Carbon Fit. The programme seeks to support micro, small and medium enterprises operating across the region with a focus on three key sectors, which are advanced manufacturing and engineering, agri-food and construction. The three key avenues of support that are available include breakfast meetings, webinars such as the ones we're having here today, and one-to-one support with the Carbon Fit team. The Phase 2 intake is now open for the one-to-one support, offering bespoke carbon footprints and action plans for businesses, and the next breakfast meeting will be held in Enniskillen on the 17th of October in the Manor House, and spaces are still available for that. To book, just visit the Mid-Southwest Region's website, which is midsouthwestregion.org/net-zero-transformation. So the six-part webinar series will cover the following six topics. So we have what is net zero, carbon auditing, which is about assessing the current carbon footprint. The third, which we're looking at the moment, is setting targets. So we're setting net zero goals and targets. The fourth, engaging partners. Fifth is on renewable technologies, and sixth is about continuous monitoring, reporting and improvement. Each of these six topics has been designed to create a building block approach to guide businesses through a better understanding of their current baseline and to give practical skills to help businesses measure and monitor a useful carbon reduction plan that can be utilised as part of your business sustainability ambitions and actions. Before we get stuck in, could I just show you this QR code? If you wouldn't mind scanning that, this is our feedback form for today. You can choose to give us feedback as we move through today's webinar, or if you want to wait until the end, but if you could just scan that now, just take a few seconds, that would be great. Great. Okay, if we just move on now, there's a lot to cover on the topic of setting net zero goals and targets. We will begin with an understanding of net zero goals. We will then look at some more insight into the importance of goal setting and strategies to help you set realistic goals. We will talk about timeline considerations and the importance of aligning with objectives. And of course, we will finish up with our Sustainability Spotlight guest, who today will be Damien McElhone from Carson McDowell. You'll have an opportunity to get involved in this interactive session by putting your questions into the Q&A box, and you can do that throughout the session today. So now I'm just going to hand over to today's expert, Ben Craig, who will take you from here.
Thanks very much, Danielle. Okay, so understanding your net zero goals. Well, it typically encompasses a wide range of activities and sectors, addressing not only carbon dioxide, but also other potent greenhouse gases, such as methane and nitrous oxide. The scope can include direct emissions from owned or controlled sources, Indirect emissions from the generation of things like purchased electricity, steam, heating, and cooling, and then all other indirect emissions that occur in a company's value chain. So everything that's upstream and everything that's downstream of you. Net zero goals are crucial in the global fight against climate change. Achieving net zero emissions is essential to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels. And that's what's recommended by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. By reducing the amount of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, net zero targets help to mitigate the extreme weather events, sea level rise, and biodiversity loss, which are just some of the consequences that we're already beginning to face from global warming. So it's obviously quite important to set some goals around net zero. If you don't set a goal, how do you know if you're going to get there or not? This is the crucial thing around goal setting, and it really helps you to drive sustainability, because it establishes a clear roadmap for emissions reduction. It enhances corporate responsibility and environmental stewardship. It also brings business benefits. It helps you to mitigate climate-related risks, helps you to achieve cost savings through improved energy efficiency and resource management. And of course, that goes straight to your bottom line. It also helps you to manage stakeholder expectations, because it helps to meet investor, customer, and regulator demands for sustainability. You may have had that fateful phone call from your big customer that's asking you, so what is your carbon footprint and what are you doing about it? It also builds trust and it enhances your brand reputation. The more transparent you can be and the more honest you are about where you are and where you're going is really going to help you to build that trust with your clients, with your key stakeholders, and help to build your brand reputation alongside that. It's also a strategic focus. This kind of goal setting is going to align sustainability initiatives with your business strategy. It is not an add-on to business, it is part of your business. And it helps you to prioritize actions and allocate resources more effectively, because you're taking that holistic view of things. So goal setting provides a clear roadmap for organizations, outlining specific actionable steps that are needed to achieve desired outcomes. And this helps in directing organizational efforts and resources towards strategic priorities. Well-defined goals in organizations can help align their activities with their vision and mission, and that ensures that every action contributes to overarching objectives. Everything happens together in one seamless motion. Goals can serve as a common ground that bring together different stakeholders, and that encourages collaboration and collective action. By working towards shared objectives, stakeholders can build stronger relationships and contribute to the success of the organization's mission. So, setting realistic net zero goals is going to ensure achievability, continuous progress, and also give some flexibility. It's going to foster cross-functional collaboration, resource efficiency and accountability. It's going to help you to get employee buy-in. It's going to help you mitigate risks and provide a competitive advantage. SMART is an acronym you may have heard of before, and it stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. This is a really helpful framework in setting clear and attainable goals that are well-defined and structured. To be specific, goals should be clear. You need to answer the question of what needs to be accomplished, why it's important, and who's going to be involved. It's got to be measurable. Goals should have criteria for measuring progress and success, ensuring that you can track and assess outcomes. These are your KPIs. Goals should be realistic and attainable, considering available resources and constraints. Setting ambitious yet achievable targets motivates teams without setting them up for failure. Ensure that the goals are within the organization's capabilities and that the necessary resources are available to achieve them. So you're going to need to work out, how much time can you apportion, how much budget can you get, and who can work on this within your team. And it's got to be relevant. Goals should align with broader organizational objectives and be pertinent to the context and the priorities. Lastly, it's got to be time bound. Goals need to have a clear time frame. They've got to have deadlines that create a sense of urgency and prompt timely action. There's no point setting this way too far into the future. You really need to kind of chunk this out so that you've got a piece by piece approach to get things done. Conducting a thorough baseline assessment is absolutely crucial to the start of your journey because it helps you understand where you are. What's the current state of your emissions? What are your organizational capabilities? And that's the starting point against which all your progress can be measured. Baseline assessment involves gathering data on your current greenhouse gas emissions, your energy usage, and some other relevant metrics that are associated with that too. And this data really forms the foundation for setting those realistic and informed targets. So by incorporating SMART goals, conducting thorough baseline assessments, and setting incremental milestones, you can establish realistic strategies for goal setting that's actionable, measurable, and adapts to the changing conditions that we all face in business every day. Also, really important for us to consider timeline. There is a short-term and long-term consideration here. You need to combine immediate steps with long-term goals for sustained progress. So maybe begin by focusing on quick wins like energy audits and efficiency improvements. That's going to help you drive cost and carbon reductions and help you generate the momentum that you need to get going. It's going to help set realistic interim targets to track and maintain progress as well. Take a phased approach, break the journey into manageable stages, each targeting specific areas. Establish sequential milestones for each phase to build on success, and plan and allocate resources effectively for each of these phases. And of course, you need to be adaptable. Adjusting timelines based on new regulations and market conditions is absolutely essential to make sure that this is relevant throughout the course of your program. And integrating emerging technologies as they become available can really help you accelerate. So you can modify strategies based on the latest scientific findings and best practices too. So what does a net zero journey look like? Carbon reduction to decrease your carbon emissions year on year, essentially. To assist, you can set short-term targets of 5 to 10 years. For example, scope 1 and 2 emissions. Your near-term target might be based on scope 1 and 2, and scope 3 accounts for 40% of your total emissions. So the additional scope 3 target may also be required. These are 5 to 10 year greenhouse gas emission targets that are in line with a 1.5 degree Celsius pathway. Something typical is maybe 30 to 50% reduction of scope 1 and 2 by 2030 and net zero by 2050. When companies reach their near-term target date, they must calculate new near-term targets to serve as milestones on the path towards reaching their long-term targets. So when near-term targets are coming together to galvanize you towards the action that you need to do to be able to reduce your emissions by 2030, and you reach 2030, you're going to need to have a look at that again and say, now, what are my new near-term targets that are going to take me on the journey towards 2050? So perhaps maybe setting a new near-term of 2040 or sooner. Your long-term targets, and I've already kind of mentioned a bit of this, but your long-term targets are 2050. This is the date at which we must all reach net zero if we are to align with science-based targets. This must cover at least 95% of company-wide scope 1 and 2 emissions and 90% of scope 3 emissions. So that's 95% of everything that is directly controlled by you and indirectly controlled by you. And then 90% of everything that's upstream and downstream, things like use of sold product, end of life of the product, business travel, and so on, everything in your supply chain. Long-term targets drive economy-wide alignment and long-term business planning to reach the level of global emission reduction needed to meet climate goals that are based on science. So you really do need these long-term targets, and we've got to work at these year on year. So you'll actively, as a company, be setting out to reduce and remove these emissions from your operations. And by doing so, you're in fact reducing somebody else's scope 3 because we're all in somebody else's value chain. So some considerations here for short and long term, your time frame, your ambition, what's going to be your boundary approach, what methods are you going to take? So, what's our near term? Is it 5 to 10 years? 2050 is the latest, but maybe you want to set 2040. What's your ambition? Do you want to go to 1.5 degrees, or do you want to go just well below 2 degrees? Perhaps you really want to accelerate when you're going to achieve these things by. So really set what's your ambition? And the boundary, how much coverage of your emissions inventory is required? This is a big piece. You need to really understand what is included within your scope 1 and 2, and you need to map out what's included within your scope 3. And that's the big piece of work that comes down the road. For this program, we're really focused on scope 1 and scope 2. The methods here, what are the eligible methods to set your targets? So absolute reduction, that's really key. So we're not looking at carbon offsetting in this sense, which is not changing anything about your business and what you're doing, but this is looking at specifically how can we change our business operations to absolutely reduce our emissions. Sector-specific intensity convergence, again, really important. And there's going to be, increasing government guidance on that coming out. Shifting to renewable electricity, absolutely great way to reduce your scope 2 emissions. You can do that through a renewable tariff or by setting up your own renewable energy projects on site. Supplier or customer engagement, absolutely crucial in scope 3 in particular. And scope 3 economic intensity reduction or physical intensity reduction. So there's a whole range of methods for you to consider in both the short term and the long term. And obviously, as we move more into the long term, we're really starting to look at how do we align industry wide, how do we really tackle scope 3, and how do we get off of fossil fuel based energy consumption. It's really important that we align with objectives. And we just kind of touched on that in the last slide, but we need to ensure that net zero goals support your organization's mission and vision, as well as those broader industry goals that we just talked about. So really integrate this into your strategy. Think about it across your teams. You might need to involve the finance department. You might need to involve your operations team. You might need to involve your marketing team, any sales teams. People really need to be across this together. And resource allocation, each team needs to be resourced up as part of this. They need to have the time to be able to do it, and they need to have the budget to be able to take action. So that all needs to have a clear return on investment and needs to be brought back full loop back to that strategic integration that's driving the business forward. So the next steps, developing an action plan, defining objectives, clearly outlining the objectives and targets to be achieved. You need to set timelines for each step of the action plan, ensuring accountability and progress tracking. You need to assign responsibilities. Who are going to be the people that are going to do this within your organization, clarifying who's accountable, and you need to identify those resources we just touched on. Stakeholder engagement. This is really important because this is where materiality comes in. You need to identify and prioritize stakeholders who will be impacted by or can influence the success of your net zero goals. Communicate those objectives that you have with them. Clearly communicate them. The benefits of net zero to stakeholders, for example, that this is going to boost competitive advantage, help you access a new market area, keep hold of big clients that you need to keep the business afloat. You want to seek input and feedback and encourage those stakeholders to provide input and collaboration and buy-in throughout the process. I need to provide regular updates. What is the progress? What achievements have you had? You need to be transparent and accountable with all of that. So there's no good saying we're going to plant a tree for every product we sell and then never planting a tree. And then when the question comes, how many trees have you planted? You're not able to kind of back it up with actually, here's what we've done. You need to be clear and on the front foot about that messaging. And companies that haven't have certainly fallen afoul of that. And lastly, continuous improvement, regular reviews, schedule those reviews, assess your progress against targets and identify areas for improvement. Not everything that you try is going to work. So you're going to need to learn as you go. Nobody's got the full picture on this. And I think Damien will, probably attest to that in his piece down the line on this. But this is a constant learning process, just like anything in business, really. So you're going to need to update your goals consequently, adapt them and your strategies based on those new insights, those changes in circumstances, and the emerging technologies that are coming on the scene that are really going to change the game for us. Very hard to decarbonize air travel right now, but there are some very exciting technologies that are really going to help with that are going to come along very, very soon. Fostering a culture of continuous learning and improvement within the organization is going to encourage experimentation and innovation. And that really supports lots of other key areas of business within your operations. Celebrate the successes too. When there's an achievement and a milestone is reached, you need to recognize that. That's so motivational to teams to continue. And by following these next steps, organizations such as yourselves can really develop a detailed action plan, engage stakeholders effectively, foster a culture of continuous improvement, and drive that success in achieving net zero goals. I'm going to hand over to Danielle now, who's going to take you through some next pieces. But perhaps firstly, you want to take a very quick look at the activities in the workbook that you'll have received yesterday. And this should be completed ahead of the next webinar. So that's your homework. Check out your workbook and start filling it in ahead of the next webinar. And this is going to help you to understand what we've discussed today. And the workbook is really designed as that tool to help you really unpack the learning that's in each of these webinars and start to apply it practically within your business.
Okay, thank you so much for that, Ben. We will now move on to our Sustainability Spotlight guest. And sorry, we're just flicking through a few slides here at the moment. That's great. Okay, so our Sustainability Spotlight guest today is Damien McElhone from Carson McDowell. Damien, you're very welcome. Thank you for joining us today. I would love it if you could just start by giving us a brief introduction to yourself and Carson McDowell.
Yeah, thanks very much for that introduction, Danielle. And thanks for the invite to come and speak on today's webinar. My name's Damien McElhone. I'm a partner in Carson McDowell in the banking and finance team. For anyone that hasn't heard of Carson McDowell, we're the largest independent law firm here in Northern Ireland. We have around 200 staff working within the business. We're a full service law firm, advise clients both in the private and the public sector, and also across a real range of different sectors that our clients work in, ranging from the energy sector to hospitality and leisure, construction, and broader corporate activity as well. So we've been around for a while, and yeah, we're keeping active in the local market. We also have a very small boutique Dublin office that specialises in some healthcare law advice for clients that operate on an all island basis here. So yeah, we've been keeping busy the last while.
Good. And tell us a little bit now about the actual sustainability journey. We'll start to move into that. What inspired you at Carson McDowell to take on the sustainability agenda and start moving through that?
Yeah, well, I've been with the firm just for a couple of years now, from January 2022. But I think it was the year previous to that there was a decision made internally, probably really driven by the management team within the partnership. I suppose it was probably a a combination of wanting to do the right thing in terms of beginning that sustainability journey, and addressing that within the business, alongside demands from our clients as well, in terms of what they've been doing, and the journeys that perhaps they had started as well. So it probably was a combination of those factors that led to the formation of an environmental and sustainability team within the business, which is made up of a range of different people within the business, from the partnership members of the partnership team to the fee earners, members of our business support functions as well, across our secretary teams, finance functions, marketing. So it's really that broad range of people within the business that are committed to really driving on the focus on sustainability within Carson McDowell.
Right. Okay. And uh, we heard Ben talk a lot today about the approach to setting net zero goals. How did you go about doing that within the organization?
Yeah, it probably came out of those initial meetings of the environmental sustainability team, that was formed with that kind of mix of individuals from across the business. And it's probably, touching back on what Ben said, it was trying to see, I suppose, where we could start collecting some of the data that might be needed to help us frame and shape some of the goals that we might have, and I suppose even just upskilling in terms of our awareness. I know the area has a lot of terminology and acronyms, so I think there was been a lot of learning at the outset, and continues to be, to keep abreast of those developments as well. So we focused on really looking at the scope 1 and the scope 2 emissions. I think that's where we thought there would be opportunities to set goals and to move forward. And I think we probably quickly realized within the business that we needed to have some additional expertise in helping us as part of that too. So we engaged with Carbon Fit then back in 2021 to help us, I suppose, collate the data that we needed, so that we could really analyze the scope 1 and the scope 2 piece, and set the goals. So really, yeah, I suppose it was that bit of internal learning, and then recognizing that it would be helpful to have a partner who really specialize in the area, to help us progress along on that journey. And then from last year in 2023, we've started to measure the scope 3 emissions as well, in order to enable us to set some goals in terms of the scope 3 piece as well.
Okay, and I suppose it's really, the second half to that question, but what have you found to be some of the key benefits for yourselves in setting those net zero targets?
Yeah, I suppose there's probably some of the real immediate obvious benefits in terms of reducing some of the costs within the business. Some easy wins from perhaps changing to LED light bulbs within the offices within which we operate. So there probably were a few easy wins on that side, but I think it's probably more so the larger piece around holding ourselves accountable as a business, within the local market within which we operate, and giving us an opportunity to benchmark ourselves within our peers within that marketplace, and to monitor progress, on a year by year basis, with, I suppose, the hope and intention that we improve incrementally year on year. I suppose we kind of pride ourselves within the business that we're fully committed to the ESG agenda, and setting net zero targets, being accountable for them as well too. So I think there is something out of that larger piece that, I suppose, that hopes that it gives us a bit of a competitive edge within the market. It helps our reputation, holds us accountable, and enables us to stay ahead of the curve, as well, as best we can too.
Yeah, and like, as a result of that process, and as a result of your journey, and some of the results you're starting to see, like, how have you found your clients and partners have responded to that? I know you've sort of touched on the idea of responding to the marketplace and all of the rest, but what sort of response have you found?
Yeah, there's been good positive feedback, I suppose, in terms of the business that we operated in. And even within the team within which I practice, we have a lot of large financial institutions, a range of funders, but a number of large financial institutions that have panel arrangements that we're part of. And we have found that as part of those panel arrangements, renewal processes, and annual conversations with those clients, it's very much firmly on our clients' agenda in terms of sustainability initiatives within our business, what we're doing, how we're seeking to improve those. So we found it's really helped us in our engagement with our clients to be able to show that it's something that we place front and center internally, that we have a focus on, that we're setting goals and we're working towards. So I think it's really helped us with those types of clients, and also when we're pitching for new work and new opportunities, particularly in the public sector, across various public sector frameworks, and just wider tender processes with other clients, whereby we have seen an evolution towards the sustainability criteria, and being able to evidence real action on that front is front and center as part of those processes as well too. So it's been really good to be able to demonstrate, and I suppose even just to talk about some of the initiatives we've had internally. And it's been good, I think, from an internal perspective as well, with the larger staff force and working force. We perhaps don't get to see each other as much as we once would have, and as part of some of the initiatives we've taken up recently. So we've had a couple of beach cleans. We have one coming up now again in the autumn time in White Park Bay. We've conducted some tree planting exercises as well out in Kilkeel. So it's been great actually internally. It's been an opportunity for people within the business to network with each other, and people that are invested in sustainability agenda to come forward and volunteer at those events. It's not always plain sailing. Some of the initiatives maybe don't fall or don't maybe land as well as we hope they do as they would initially. Just know one recent example was the removal of desk side bins within the office, and moving towards maybe more of a central piece around that, and focusing more. I suppose we identified that there's probably something better we can do internally in terms of our glass recycling as part of the overall recycling initiatives that we have. So I suppose there's a bit of taking people on the journey with you, but I think overall the response both internally within the business and with our partners and our clients locally has been very positive as well too.
Yeah, there's actually a lot in that answer really for people to take on board, because you've sort of gone through everything there, from, like Ben had mentioned, the idea of we're all part of somebody's supply chain. So
Yeah.
you're just, you like everybody else, is part of somebody else's supply chain, and ultimately it's really going to impact that opportunity for profit making as well as money savings. So all feeds into the margins at the end of the day too. So it just makes sense. And then also around that staff engagement and morale piece, and yeah, it can be sometimes bringing change can be I suppose it can bring uncertainty.
Yeah,
within teams.
change isn't easy, and maybe within the legal profession, we wouldn't probably be well renowned for moving too quickly when it comes to change. But yeah, again, I suppose when you can see the benefits from that change, you kind of hope that people get on board, and it's been well thought out in terms of prompting those types of changes as well too within the business.
Yeah, and tell me now, before we move on to just some questions from the attendees here today, we'll be taking questions for both Damien and Ben. So if you want to get those in now. Couple of last questions from me though, Damien. What is next for yourselves at Carson McDowell?
Yeah, it's probably going back to what Ben said about trying to set some smaller short-term goals, and some of maybe the long-term bigger goals as well too. So maybe starting with those bigger goals, we're really hoping to reduce our current Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions by 50% by 2025, and then by 100% by 2030 as a target we've set, and that hopefully then brings us to that commitment to be net zero by 2050. We'll have to obviously then address some things in the short term. So one of the things I think we've identified as some of the recent audit work we've been doing is that we've noticed that we've probably some improvements we can make in terms of our environmental policy that we have, updating that, and that maybe touches on what Ben said about, I think it was about a year ago we created environmental policy, but it's, taking the time to go back and revisit that and see if there are areas of improvement or deficiency. So I think we've recognized there's probably a bit more we could do on the overall biodiversity and nature piece, incorporating them into our overall environmental policy. So we're identifying areas where we can improve and we can do more. So we're seeking to take those smaller steps in the short term, but also having that one eye on the larger goals down the track as well too.
Okay, and I always like to end with this question for our guests. If you were to give one or two tips or pieces of advice to businesses who are starting out in that journey for themselves, what would you say? What would that be?
Yeah, I suppose the first thing is if you haven't started yet, is just take the plunge. Get involved in the process. There's plenty of good information out there and in terms of what's involved, getting up to speed with the scope 1, scope 2, scope 3 emissions, the various goals that the people are working towards, perhaps in your peers within your industry or your sector as well too. You can maybe glean some good information from that. You probably already have some good data within your business, so I suppose it's trying to source that data and validate it and be aware of who has access to that data and where it's stored and whether there are areas in which that data can be collected in a better way, because I suppose that really helps to set goals and to measure improvements over a period of time. And it probably goes without saying, getting the specialist knowledge really helps as well too. There's probably a lot of knowledge within the various businesses that you have, and people coming at with various bits of expertise that can really form a good team to address issues that you'll encounter as part of the journey. But having someone with specialist knowledge and information who's really at that cutting edge, the likes of Carbon Fit, engage with them. I'm sure they're more than happy to have conversations, to have coffees, to have meetings, to have discussions about difficulties you're having. So it's probably a combination of each of those.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, we are going to open up the floor now and have a few questions from the audience before we wrap up. So we don't have a huge amount of time left, but we do have some great questions coming in here at the moment. Where do I start? I think, Ben, we will start with yourself if you don't mind. We talked a lot today about all the various scopes. You talked about scope 3. Damien has also mentioned that. It's the question is really around scope 3 can feel very overwhelming. I suppose scopes 1 and 2 feel much more within your control. Where do you start with that whole scope 3? Any advice to people who are considering looking at that?
From my perspective, I mean, scope 3 is both challenging and rich with opportunity. So one of the things that I mentioned earlier is around energy and resource efficiency. And the resource efficiency bit is where there tends to be a lot of opportunity to do things in new ways that are going to save you money. So identifying any area of waste within your business and looking to see how do you reduce that or turn that into a revenue stream is really important. One of the key areas of scope 3 is waste generated in operations. And of course, you get charged for stuff going to landfill. So if you can reduce the amount of waste that you have going to landfill, that's money that you save straight to your bottom line, and it reduces your carbon footprint in scope 3. So that's a key one. I think starting somewhere like that is really good, and even better if in the process of thinking about if you create products, if you're in manufacturing, for example, thinking about how could you think about the design of your product so that you design out waste from the outset. Or how do you make it reusable or something that comes back to you and that you extend the value of the life of that product? So that's a huge opportunity to address both waste generated in operations, and end of life of sold product, because that's another key part of scope 3. So those two bits are really good. The other piece, of course, is engaging with your supply chain. And that's a huge area of potential collaboration, new business innovation, kind of really deepening partnership, working together. And there's lots of opportunity to do better business as a result of that. And, I mentioned in my bit that we are in everybody else's scope 3 is our scope. Our scope 1 and 2 is in somebody else's scope 3. We are all interrelated on this. So if we all reduce our scope 1 and 2, we all reduce our scope 3. And so by coming together on that agenda, that creates real opportunity. And speaking with businesses quite recently who are starting out on that journey, what they're noticing is that by teaming up almost as net zero partners, they're starting to see the advantages to each other, in terms of, maybe they can have more confidence in a contract between each other. Maybe they want to do a shared marketing piece. Maybe they get better buying power when they go to perhaps a renewable energy provider, for example, as a block to say, listen, we'd like to transition to renewables. There's lots of opportunities to do things almost like a cluster, in order to access some potential development. So supply chain engagement can seem scary, but also has a huge amount of opportunity within it as well if you tackle it in the right way. So yeah, those are some kind of critical areas of scope 3. I think low-hanging fruit as well, of course, being things like business travel. How do you limit it, or how do you change it to make it in a more low carbon form? Employee commuting, supporting them to do things like, maybe cycle to work, or providing some bus passes, or providing more flexibility about how and when they need to be in the office, for example. That kind of stuff, that will all affect your scope 3 to the good.
And just on that, just because it's sort of a natural second question to that answer that you gave, how long does it typically take to calculate a full carbon footprint, including scope 3?
Totally depends on the business. If you're somebody like Carson McDowell, and you're largely office based, you're not, maybe in, a kind of heavy, industry manufacturing and, company that has a huge supply chain, and that their products are going all over the world and all of that kind of thing, it's much faster. So it could, I suppose, be anywhere from, for your whole carbon footprint, anywhere from, probably a year to 18 months in total if you really focused on it. Scope 1 and 2 can be quite fast. I mean, that could be, 8 weeks, to really get to the bottom of that, depending on the complexity of the business. But to get all of your scope 3 and really get a good handle on that, it could be a year, it could be 18 months, it could be 5 years. Depending on that complexity and your access to data. And of course, that is one of the key challenges of scope 3, is actually getting your hands on data, and moving away from estimates or extrapolated forms of data within your scope 3. So I suppose, how long is a piece of string, Danielle, is the answer to that question.
Yeah,
but hopefully that gives a little bit of a sense of some of the dynamics that are at play with it.
Okay, thank you. Damien, this is definitely one that's come in for you. In your journey, what have been the biggest challenges that you faced, and were there any easy ones?
Yeah, that is an interesting one. The biggest challenge, yeah, is maybe going back to that piece around the data, because we had a lot of good data sitting within the business, sitting within different teams, and probably not realizing the importance of that, and how it could be used as part of our audits and continuing our sustainability journey. So I think that has led to a lot of improvements internally in terms of where that data is stored, who's responsible for it, who gets access to the data as well too. So yeah, that was probably the biggest challenge, but I think we've made good strides on that front over the last while. And yeah, in terms of some of the easier things or the easier parts of it was yeah, it's probably been that in internal engagement and internal collaboration. You know, it's kind of quite refreshing sometimes to step away from your desk where you're doing the day-to-day job in terms of providing legal advice, in my case, in the banking and finance sphere, to, you know, come to a room where there's a lot of energy and a lot of enthusiasm within the business for really improving our sustainability within the marketplace. So that's been I think a real positive thing that we've really gleaned from the process.
Okay, and I have one more question for you, and then one just to close that both of you can tackle. Damien, whenever you were talking earlier, we mentioned the idea of, you know, how have your partners responded. We have somebody who's interested in knowing how exactly have you gone about communicating with partners? How have you let them know about your journey?
Yeah, I suppose we have, you know, we regularly post on our socials in terms of some of the events that we're running, and I think we're really working towards, and it's maybe part of that piece about it being a journey in terms of formally reporting. So we don't have a formal report as yet, but that's very much on the list to get to this stage, and it's probably something for another target for next year when the data collection has come through for the current financial year, towards having a formal report published on our website and sent out to our clients in terms of reporting across what we've been doing in this area. We've then also started to put ourselves forward for some of there's a benchmarking process as well that business and the community run on an annual basis. So, you know, for the first year, we've put our submission in for that, and we're hopeful that we'll get an accreditation as part of that process by the end of this year as well too. So aside from that, it's really through some of the business events and having discussions and having client catch-ups and some of the anecdotal, I suppose, feedback that we get from clients, because that's where they do pick up maybe from some of the information that's posted on social, and they're aware of what we're doing within the business. So yeah, I think there's still areas in which we can improve and really sell ourselves, and that probably links in again with the accountability piece as well too, that we're focused on, and ensuring that we're able to satisfy that.
Yeah, well, actually, that's just dovetails lovely into the last question, which is for both of you. And actually, these last two questions also lead very well into what you will be covering within the next webinar, which will be focusing on how to engage partners and build those partnerships. So again, for anybody that's asking those types of questions, join in for the next webinar session. But the last question we have here is someone, they're very keen to be able to share their journey as part of their wider marketing strategy, but they're a little bit afraid of the whole greenwashing backlash thing, what to say, what not to say. Any advice there?
Yeah, just be able to stand over what you're saying. If you've got the data to back it up, say it. If you don't have the data to back it up, don't say it. That's that, you know, at a basic level, it's kind of as simple as that, you know. Be clear, you know, if it is an ambition or an intention, say it's that. If it is something that you are doing, you better be doing it and able to show that you have done it. Otherwise, you're going to fall afoul. And you know, be truthful. If you say you're going to do something and you try it and it doesn't work, tell the story. You know, that authenticity has to ring true. So there's that old adage that, you know, it takes years to build trust and seconds to lose it. And, you know, you got to be aware of that when you're communicating about what you're doing on sustainability, because we do live in an age where what you say is, you know, very easily kind of reshared and gets out there very quick, and it could be very damaging, or it could be very, very beneficial. And the key is make sure you're on the beneficial side, and how you're going to be able to do that is back it up.
Yeah, yeah, it's fairly black and white. Damien, have you anything that you would like to add to that before we
No,
wrap it up?
I don't think so. Yeah, just endorse what Ben said. I think it's very much seen as a sustainability journey. So companies and businesses and stakeholders and partners will all be on a certain point within that journey, and we're all moving towards the same destination. So yeah, I think just be honest and upfront. If you're at the start of the journey, you know, you can have the good intentions, and as you progress through, it's being held to be accountable and holding the hands up or acknowledging where you maybe haven't hit a target and reassessing that and moving forward again. So yeah, I think I would just sort of echo his comments on that.
Perfect. Well, listen, thank you both very much for your expertise today and for sharing your thoughts in our Q&A session. As I say, those last couple of questions have led nicely on to our next webinar. Don't forget that we have our next webinar on Thursday, the 24th of October, which focuses on engaging stakeholders. So very, very well tied in there. We also have our last breakfast event on the 17th of October, and that is in the Manor House in Enniskillen. So you can book your spaces there via the website, which is midsouthwestregion.org/net-0-transformation. And don't forget as well, if you would like to just take a few moments to scan the QR code, you can provide your feedback on today's session. Thank you everybody for your time today, and I hope you all have a lovely day.